Hello, everybody. So good to see all of you in the little webinar screen up top. I love seeing a bunch of new people that I've never met before. I'm so thrilled you're here. I'm super excited to introduce my guest today. We're going to get started. However, I'm going to give you a quick little introduction just to tell you a little bit about who I am, what this is for those of you who don't know. So hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining. This is the 6th installment of the Digital Campfire Download. This is the series where I talk to the creatives and entrepreneurs who are building and stoking the world's most interesting digital campfires right now. I see a ton of new faces, as I said, so welcome. Quick word on who I am. I'm Sarah Wilson, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a digital strategist. I'm based in LA. So what's a digital campfire? That's my term for a type of online destination that's more intimate, more private, and more interactive than public-facing social platforms. I launched this series to meet the creative and the entrepreneurial forces behind hyper-engaged digital campfires, with the goal to get inside them, to find out how they tick, the strategies that make them work, especially in this utterly insane time where there's so much uncertainty and beyond. I couldn't be more thrilled to introduce my guest today, but first, just a quick bit of housekeeping. I've muted all of you, so if you can't talk, that's why. The conversation is going to run about 35 to 40 minutes. You'll have a chance to ask questions at the end. If you have any questions, just pop them into the chat, and I will try to get to them either throughout or at the end. Feel free to ask questions throughout the interview. As I said, you can also raise your hand. I will call on you at the end if you have the desire to come onto the webinar and chat with us. That's totally cool as well. I know a lot of you are probably like in your pajamas, may not be the best choice. So if that's where you're at today, totally fine, use the chat. Also note that this is going to be recorded and shared out afterwards. So now on to my wonderful guest. The women's healthcare company, Modern Fertility, first burst out into the scene in 2017. Built on the premise that knowledge about what's going on inside a woman's body, specifically as it pertains to fertility, is power, and that fertility information should be way more accessible than it is. In 2018, the company shipped its first product, a direct-to-consumer mail-in hormone test that provided women a wealth of personalized data, including information about the presence of hormones that impact fertility, ovulation, and the risk of menopause earlier in life, at a fraction of the cost of traditional healthcare providers. Trust me when I say that this was and still is legit groundbreaking. Usually these types of tests would be expensive and involve going to see a specialist, which is just about 15 to 25 more layers of complication than Modern Fertility. But they didn't only pioneer a test, and that's why we're here today. They also created what I call a micro community campfire that lives and breathes alongside their product. It consists of information, resources, and support on all things fertility. A lot of brands would say they want to build a community, but few actually are, because it's very hard to actually execute. Modern Fertility is actually doing it. Here today to talk about how is Reina Pomeroy, Head of Community for Modern Fertility. Please welcome Reina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to start this conversation.
I'm so happy you're here. Thank you so much for being here. So tell us in your own words a little bit about the mission of the company. I tried to sketch it out as best I could, but I'd love hearing it from you and kind of where community fits into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the generous introduction. I think that kind of encapsulates what we do, but I think the why we do it is we're really on a mission to help people with ovaries get reproductive health information earlier and more accessible earlier in life, right? And to break the taboo of fertility in general. I think we all have this story of what sex ed might have looked like in middle school. And we want to break that open and share the real facts where science meets, the relatable pieces of, what this experience all looks like. So I love what you said earlier about the campfire that we're building, and we call it the Modern Fertility Experience. And it's not just about buying this test and then you take it and then that's it. We're really all about how do you take that information and figure out what's next for you. And so we have a lot of pieces of the puzzle, which we can break down in a little bit.
Yes, I want to get deep in that puzzle.
Yeah, let's break down that puzzle. And I think it's like, what are the different pieces that go into the whole experience? We're really interested in helping women understand what the full picture of her reproductive health career life might look like.
Okay, that makes sense. So walk me through the experience of a modern fertility customer, because I think that's how many people would first come into contact with the community, by being a customer. When you get the kit, then sort of what do you get access to when you get that?
Yeah, so even before people get the kit, they have lots of questions, right? One, it's like a new thing to take your hormone test at home and get blood drawn at home. That feels really foreign to a lot of people. And so we do a lot of education around like, what do these hormones even mean? So like at the top of the educational process, it's about like, what do these hormones do? Why are they important to you? And then once people decide that this is something that they want to pursue and purchase the kit, you can take it at home, and the test is customized to each person and the birth control that she might or might not be on. And you can join the community. You can have a nurse consult appointment included in the price of the kit. And you also can have access to webinars where you can talk to a nurse, ask questions, figure out what these results even mean. You know, it's one of those things that when you go to a doctor, you'll get like a lab and it has all these numbers and like ranges, and you don't really know what it means, and it's all in like science talk. And if you're a scientist and you're used to reading these and you're a doctor, it might be easy for you. But for most of us, that's not the case. And we need to figure out how to translate that into a way that many more people can understand it. And so that's what we're all about. We really create these tools so that women can understand what her actual numbers mean against actual data versus, you know, I've heard this so many times that at 35 your eggs go like downhill, and it's all downhill from there, and that might be the case, but we really want people to have the most accurate information about themselves. And so the part that I really work on is the community. So we have a Slack channel where people with ovaries can join, ask questions, whether it's customers or people who have not yet purchased and are just interested in fertility information as a whole. And yeah, that's one of the big touch points of the customer experience.
Okay, so I want to break that down because I think it's super interesting how you think of potential customers versus current customers, sort of this capital C community and then lowercase c community. We'll get into that. But I want to understand, was community part of the vision for modern fertility from the beginning? Like, or did it evolve kind of, oh, you know what, we're actually could be a real font of information and support and resources? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
That's a great question. So I think that, so I joined relatively recently, as of like 8 or 9 months ago, and the community existed before me. So I think the answer to that question is it existed for a long time before me, and I'm guessing that it had started a few months after we started having more people test their hormones. And, you know, I think what we're seeing is that the community is a way to normalize the experience. Testing your hormones can be really anxiety provoking, right? One, it's like a very stigmatized topic. And so seeing other people do it helps us feel like we're normal for wanting to check things out. And also like, it's a little bit like anxiety provoking in general, right? Just hearing about what might come back, or, you know, pricking your finger, and that stuff can bring up a little bit of anxiety too. So sharing stories is one of the, you know, it's part of the fabric of our company.
Okay, so sort of you envisioned, or when Carly, when the founder, went in and sort of had this vision for the company, that was part of, okay, we're going to be a font, a hub of information, as well as advice and resources. Because I think that's a key point to tease out, where it's, you know, we're seeing our community talk about this stuff, and then we actually respond to it with more tools, as opposed to, we're going to go out and create something that maybe we don't really know what they want. We're going to just sort of hope for the best. But it was actually a result, like, we're going to pour fire or gasoline on this fire and really get it going, because we already see people having these questions and wondering where to connect.
Yeah, I think our product really lends itself and the
Yeah.
experience to creating these like more intimate conversations and communities. And that was one of the reasons why it started when Afton and Carly started the company. You know, this might not have been like the first thing that they thought of, but it's definitely been a core part of the work that we do. And it's becoming more and more important, especially in this day and age, to make sure that women, and I say women, but really it's people with ovaries, to have the space that we we should deserve to, to be able to have these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to just break down the elements of what you actually offer. I love how you sketched out kind of the Slack channel, et cetera. And I want to get more into that. But in terms of what you're offering, there's information for sure. That's a big part of it. And you've talked about how your customers value you over Google. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, they think of you as like, you're better than Google.
Yeah, we actually get to come quite a bit in the community. People will come to us, they'll say like, oh, I fell down the rabbit hole and then I found you guys. I came into this community and your information is so much better than Google, which is great because there's a lot of information on Google, but it can be conflicting information. And so what we try to do with our content is to kind of strip out the, the things that women don't necessarily need to know about or see, or and translate the scientific facts into blog posts, into webinars, into digestible content that is easier to relate to.
And so do you find that they are also seeking that information elsewhere now, or is it like we're going all in on your channels because you're the most trustworthy? Like, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I think that I'm sure that there's different experiences, right? I can't distill it down to one singular experience, but I think that the ones that we see time and time again, they came into the community to just dip their toe in the water and they sort of fell down the modern fertility rabbit hole, and we're happy to have them. And the beautiful thing about it, and this comes in both anecdotal and like actual quantitative data, that people will continue to return to find information depending on where they are in their fertility path and their journey. And, one of the things that I love to do inside the community is to make sure that we have a really scalably intimate experience for them. So if we can share blog posts that are really personalized to somebody's question, or, we're really all about like helping to tailor the experience to her as much as we can. So we're constantly sharing the facts and the data.
I love that phrase, scalably intimate. How does that actually play out in real time? Like, give us an example.
Yeah, so scalably intimate to me looks like our community management team pinging each other and saying, oh, this person has this question. I know that there was somebody else who had that experience. Can we connect them? Or, hey, Nurse Jill, who is our like resident in the community fertility nurse, can you dive in and help her answer this question? Or I thought we had this blog post that answered this question. Don't we have a link to X, Y, and Z? And so we really try to be as much as possible like that concierge sort of like wraparound effect. And what has happened in the process of this is that we have shared all of these resources with our customers and our community members, that they have started to like reference those with other people who ask similar questions, which is really cool because they become experts and more invested in the community as well. So it's not just about us being the gatekeeper, it's really like sharing the wealth of knowledge, sharing that like opportunity to connect with other people. And I think people really appreciate that they get to be like a steward of somebody else's experience as well.
Totally, especially if they've gone through it, because it is so personal. I just love that that phrase, because I think it really captures scalably intimate, because I think, you need a few things to execute that. Number one, a really strong team that gets it. But number two, like the trust in your community to sort of take that content or those resources and run with them and really be like your ambassadors.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, we try our best to make sure that people know where they can go as much as possible. I think Slack is a really challenging platform and also an awesome platform.
Yeah, talk about that a bit, because Slack is your main hub. So you've created this Modern Fertility Slack channel. Just for those who don't know, it is available and open to anybody. You do not just have to be a Modern Fertility customer. But are there tiers that get unlocked with certain...
There's not tiers, but there are different channels depending on where you are in your experience. So like if you are a Modern Fertility customer and you want to figure out like how do I actually test my hormones? how do I take my test? There's a channel for that, and you can go to that channel to ask questions. There's also a trying to conceive channel. There's a maybe one day channel for those who are not yet interested. We have an egg freezing channel. So we have a lot of different threads that are happening, and we try to support them the best we can. Sometimes for somebody who hasn't used Slack in the past with work or whatever, it can be really overwhelming. There's a lot of places to look and a lot of people to talk to. So I can understand how it can be challenging. And so we try to automate that onboarding experience as much as possible so that they have as much information, but not too much that they get super overwhelmed.
Okay, so it's both good and bad. It has good and bad qualities, but overall, do you think it's working for you? Like, if someone wanted to build a community, would you say, you know what, Slack is the right channel, it's really helped us? Or would you be like, look, there's a bunch more now that we could look at that maybe weren't around when we launched, we'd probably go in a different direction?
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons for every single platform. So unfortunately, I can't say, and I've had lots of these conversations with community folks because, you know, every community has different needs. And so it's sort of like, actually, CMX Hub has a really amazing tool that helps you understand the different platforms and like whether you should invest in one or versus the other. And there's lots of free ones and there's paid ones. But yeah, I think it kind of depends on like what the values of your company are and like what you're trying to get out of the platform. Slack has been amazing. It feels like texting with a friend, and that's the vibe that we're really going for versus like, hey, I have to log into something to do this thing. So we love the Slack feel.
Cool. And so can you talk a little bit about the decision to open it up to non-customers? I mean, I know you spoke about that at the top, but I don't know that would be like a natural decision for everybody and maybe not right for every community, but why is it right for you?
Yeah, so it's sort of an experiment, right? I think that my hope is that we can become the hub of health information and like reproductive health information for people with ovaries. And in order to do that, we can't just have it be for customers. That's just a teeny tiny group of people. I mean, it's not teeny tiny, but you know, the rest of the world. And so how do we become that and also destigmatize the topic of fertility and that conversation as a whole? And we have a lot of information to share with the world that isn't just for customers that we would love to be able to share with others. And so, you know, we've also seen people who join the community and then end up purchasing because they find out that, you know, all of these people have taken it and have great things to say, or like have, you know, they've been able to learn about other people's experiences and they say, oh, you know what, I want to learn more about that too. And so it's been an interesting like conversion strategy as well. And it was just based on a hunch that we really could add value to people who aren't necessarily available right now to purchase, and we can still
So that's super interesting that you raised that. Do you track that? I mean, do you track sort of how your community is actually translating into dollars and cents in terms of conversions? And how do you track that? Because it's very hard not only to track somebody's full journey, like they may step in and out of that Slack group over many years. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so that's a really tough one. I think community metrics is I don't know, like how everyone else is thinking.
Yeah, if anyone else on this can weigh in, you're open.
This is a conversation just like the platform conversation that I've had with many community managers. And it's just a really tough one because community has intangible value in a lot of ways. And there's some like very tactical ways that we can measure those things, but we don't know, you know, what the causation was of somebody joining and then purchasing. We don't know like if they were already primed to purchase, but they hadn't gotten paid yet. So they didn't end up buying until they joined. And so it is something that we measure, but it's not like the way that we make decisions or the way that we value the community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you care that there are probably people in the community that may never be customers?
Yeah, I think that that's going to be the case for any content that we create, right? On Instagram, we're creating constant content around fertility information, and those folks might never buy, and that's okay. But that's the way that we cultivate the lowercase c, so to speak, and like making sure that we can add value to those people and demystify fertility information. And if that's all we can do, I think we're getting
Yeah, you're functioning as a content destination for a lot of people. And I think that's a super interesting point because you really are a brand that's functioning in the role of a publisher in the way that a newspaper might have historically. It's obviously very common now. We don't even think twice about it, but it actually is really hard to do well because it's not necessarily the core capability of the brand, right? The brand is very good at creating the product, but to actually do this and execute it well is hard, because it is like a completely different skill set. You mentioned, sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm very fortunate that I get to work with Hannah, who is our content, head of content. And she and I work really closely together on both social and community, so uppercase and lowercase C's, to make sure that we're really providing the level of context and like information that we think that people need in order to like really make decisions for herself. We're not like a company that is saying like you need to do X, Y, and Z. It's really more about like how can we give you what you need so that you can make decisions for yourself.
Right, and just sort of serve up that information. I think we've talked a lot about information, and when it comes to providing value and creating a community that people actually want to be part of, I think information is really only one piece of that pie. Just speaking from personal experience, I actually went through an egg freezing process several years ago when I was at Facebook. It was totally covered. So I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I didn't have a community to connect to during that process. And honestly, it sucked. Like going through it. I mean, I had friends, but not a ton who'd really gone through it. And it's a really lonely experience. And so there's a huge emotional piece that you sort of are fulfilling here for people. So I would love for you to speak to that, sort of how you think about speaking to people's emotional needs, like what those are, and really strategically, I mean, it's a hard thing. People are sharing what's really going on in a very often very vulnerable place.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. I think it is really hard when you feel like you're going through it alone, even if you have the insurance part covered or the payment part covered, because it can be a really emotionally trying piece of the puzzle. And so I have so many anecdotal sort of like stories that I've been in contact with. I feel like I'm always constantly thinking of and like connecting these stories like we were talking about earlier. I think that it's really important to make sure that we're able to create a community that's safe for these confidential type of conversations. But one of the things I'm always fascinated by is how often women will come to us before they've shared information with their partners, before they've shared information with their moms.
I'm seeing that in the Slack group. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of, I had a miscarriage that happened and I'm telling you guys first. Or anyway, continue. I want to hear how this is playing out because it's fascinating.
No, absolutely. Miscarriages, pregnancies. I want to have conversations with my partner about fertility. I'm already taking this test, but I didn't want to show him that I was taking this test, right? Like all of those things happen inside the community. And I'm so fortunate to be able to like kind of be witness to those conversations. But just as like a story to share, one woman was curious about her fertility and just took the test out of sheer curiosity. Her mom didn't have any, troubles getting pregnant, and she had no other indicators, like her period was pretty regular. I should also say, like, the community is like no TMI zone. Like nothing, like everything is fair game. Right. And
why am I not surprised? Yeah. No one's surprised.
So if this is like raising red flags for anyone who's listening, this is just the world that we live in. But we're about busting these fertility taboos. So anyway, so she found out that she had low AMH, which is, the indicator for ovarian reserve. It's a little bit of a red flag if she wants to have kids. And so basically it meant that she had fewer eggs than people in her age range. And she took her results to the doctor and is now going through a few rounds of egg freezing. She's just starting that process. Let's see. Another one is in a same-sex relationship, and they're looking to TTC, trying to conceive later this year or maybe early next year. But unlike a straight couple, as you might imagine, they have a lot of logistical things that they have to figure out, whether it's she's going to carry or her partner's going to carry. And so they're both testing their hormones to see like who's going to be a better candidate for this particular round if they want to have multiple kids. And so there's a lot of considerations. And if you take this test at a infertility clinic, and you don't have the insurance that covers it, often they don't unless you've been trying for a year and haven't been able to conceive. And if you're in a same-sex relationship, that's not even covered because being in a same-sex relationship doesn't consider you aren't considered infertile, right? Because you haven't been trying for a year with a partner of the opposite sex. So it can be really frustrating. Wow. Both of them are testing to their fertility hormones through modern fertility and figuring out what that might look like for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you have all these conversations happening on your channel, and then there's the information, and it's sort of like those two things live together.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of like, it might be too much of a transactional question, but which one do you think is the stickiest in terms of keeping people on the community channels and talking? Because I think a lot of people who are building these would want to know, like, where should I focus? Is it information? Is it resources that are supportive? Like, is it both?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a really tricky question. I think that we're in a lucky place now because the company is at a place where we've been able to bring on a full-time community person, a full-time content person, but it wasn't always this way, right? And so thinking about if you're newer in the community building, and I've done this like as a one-person community builder as well, and been able to grow and scale a community. So it's not impossible to do. But I think it's a balance of creating that scalable intimacy and really listening to the people who are at the very beginning of your journey with you and building the community with them. It's not about building for somebody out there. It's really about like building in tandem with and really listening, and being a better community builder means being a better listener and taking that information and saying, okay, strategically, how does this scale? How does this work for more people?
How do you do that? I mean, it's easy to say, but how does that, are you creating channels to actually solicit that feedback from your MVPs, for example?
Yes, okay. I love this question so much. So in the time that I've been around, so since I've started, we have built out a community advisory board. So this is a group of people who are at different, they're like an intersection of all of our customers and our community members, and they're at different places in the fertility journey. They have different experiences, right? We've built that out so that we can really listen to these folks as we build new things, as we update our dashboard and results pages, and really thinking about like, how do we make the experience even better for people at different places? We also, let's see, I'm trying to think of other things. So we have started to host meetups around different topics. We used to do in-person meetups way back when, before COVID.
We used to do. I love it.
Right? Literally the week before California shut down, we had a couple of meetups, and then we ended up not doing the rest of the season. But yeah, now we do them virtually, and they're actually going super well. And I think that this is like a testament to that conversation, right? So we do deep dives, the really intimate conversations versus like a webinar where somebody's teaching something. It's really just like a meetup group and talking about people's experiencing, asking people questions. So we've met about like different health conditions, whether it's endometriosis or PCOS. We have talked about where people are in like the fertility journey. So maybe they're trying to conceive or trying to conceive over 35 or you know, wherever. Mental health, LGBTQ is one of them. And those things are really important for us because it connects like the name in the Slack channel to an actual face and story. So for me, like that experience is really powerful for them to see my face, for me to see their face, and like to be able to have that really more personal interaction.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Have there been specific things that have come out of any of those interactions, whether it's, you know, the advisory board, which I love, or any of those meetups that have informed new product direction, new ideas for how you're going to build out your community? Anything else?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think for sure. So when we were rolling out a new part of our dashboard, which is our results experience, so like after you take the test, your result turns into a report. We definitely pinged our community to see, you know, our MVPs, so to speak, right? People who are always in the community, and asking them to basically take a look at the new experience and what were they thinking? How would this be valuable to them? What would they want to see more of? And so our product team does a lot of user experience with these folks and really try to use that as a vessel for listening. And on my end, you know, whenever I flag something that I've seen in the community, in the product, that I think that we should gut check. The community advisory board is a channel that I definitely lean into and say, hey, I'm thinking that we should do X, Y, and Z. What are your thoughts? Would love to hear, you know, your 2 cents. And they're very very vocal
Yeah.
about letting us know what
shocking.
Yeah, it's not shocking and shocking that they will, they'll be very vocal about how they want to see things happen. And sometimes we're able to incorporate, sometimes we're not. But I think that on the whole, they feel really heard. And I've tried to build this community advisory board in a way that is, one, there's a lot of best practices, but also like I think about how would I want to be treated and like what kind of experience would I like to have with my favorite brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that we're really trying to create the experience as a whole, and so that we can continue to evolve the experience with the product.
Yeah. So to that end, you have one product now. You're probably going to come out with more. I mean, part of your vision is sort of owning or really being embedded in the lives of women in sort of a holistic way. I don't know what your next product is. I don't know if you can speak to that, but I guess what I'm wondering is, has the intel from the community like tangibly informed product direction?
For sure. I think we're always listening and we hear the struggles of the women in the community, and we are always trying to figure out how can we fill that gap for them. There's a lot of misinformation with different products or how to use them, or what does this even mean after I get something back? And we really want to demystify that information. And so I think that, what we're going to see in the future, I can't allude to what is going to be launching.
Cool. I had to ask.
Yeah, no, of course. But I think that the thing that you've already said is like, we want to be a hub of information and personalized health for her. And that's the ethos of how we create and what we're creating, right in line with what our community is telling us.
Right. That's the big vision. So I think it's just something worth calling out. It's sort of like really figuring out what your vision is as a company. I mean, I know that's stating the obvious, but in many ways it's not always articulated with every brand. And I think really getting clear on what that vision is, and then how does it trickle down and inform what your audience really wants from you, because if you're not providing that value based on what your vision is, and it's not connected, then it's air, right? It's meaningless.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we're constantly experimenting, right? Like with our content and things.
Yes, tell me about some of that. Like, what are some tools you're experimenting with? What are some new platforms you're experimenting with?
Yeah, I don't think that we're like implementing like any new tools or anything like that. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is, if we want to like do a webinar with a doctor, it takes a lot of work to get that up and running, but we can test it very quickly on Instagram and say, is anyone interested in this topic, right? So we can post something relatively quickly on Instagram stories, test the waters, and see if it's worth investing in, so that we can produce more of a fuller experience. And it's funny because a couple weeks ago we just did a sex ed revamped, and just breaking down sex ed myths and fertility information. And it was really an engagement focused, not at all like conversion focused thing. And I'm always of the mind that if you ask it for engagement, you will get the engagement, but sometimes it's not the case. And we had a hypothesis that perhaps people are not going to be interested in talking openly about like their periods or birth control or whatever. And we had so many comments on the ones that I was surprised to see people really engaging and like feeling like they were also heard and like their experience was normalized, because everyone else had a relatively similar experience, or they found somebody who had a similar experience to them. So so it's really finding your people, really. And finding your people even on public channels.
You as a product do have some competition, right, in the space. There's other companies that do tests. Do you think of the community as a competitive advantage?
I absolutely think so, because I think that, there's other companies that probably test AMH and other, fertility hormones, but the experience is different, right? Like all the way from buying your product, and like our customer experience team thinks of themselves, and like we really try to think of them as like, we've got your back. Any fertility related question, we will ping our clinical team to answer those questions. We will connect you to the webinar to make sure that you understand your results. If you have any questions, we can answer them for you. The community with Nurse Jill and all, we have mental health experts, we have doctors in there doing AMAs. And so it's a really personalized experience, and that's what's really important to us, that no matter how many people come into the community, hopefully one day we'll, 10 and 100x our community size, but that intimate feeling of being able to answer those questions, it will not be, it will not go away when that happens.
Definitely. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in building this? Whether it's, making sure that you have up-to-date information. I would think that would be very hard to make sure, like, the scientific efficacy of what you're promoting, because it's content that's going to directly impact people's health. But is that something that you encounter? If what else? I would love to know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of other groups out there, whether it's Facebook groups about trying to conceive, and we're competing with these other groups, but it's not really a competition. I think the way that I like to think about it is like, we are a reliable source of information. And if there's sort of like this, oh, I heard this, but I heard this, and I heard this, right? Like, we try to nip it in the bud. We will go to our clinical team and ask them for the data, because the data doesn't lie, right? So we try to connect the I heard this with the real facts as much as possible, and also give like the human take on what this actually means.
I think it's really important. I mean, I think one thing you've done a good job of talking about is, a hormone test is just one piece of information in like a total health picture. And I think if you were to come and just, let's say, see a modern fertility ad, you might think, oh, I can do that and find out my total picture. But the community and like all your channels, actually, it's not that. I mean, it's much more complex, and you kind of need to get in the weeds to understand that. So it is actually an essential part of the overall brand to sort of get in there. So it's like you've really tied that community to the product in an interesting way. I really think.
Thank you. It's so funny because a lot of people who come into the community will say, oh, I didn't even realize this was part of it. And I think that's definitely, our biggest priority, so that you can test your hormones and like making sure that you have that information. Those results are so important. But I think that the community can unlock a lot of like deeper insights and connect you with more resources and people who are going through similar things.
You're catching people really at the beginning of their whole like fertility journey, right? Like it's from sometimes when they're 20 years old coming into your community and thinking about maybe one day having kids, maybe not. A lot of them will be parents one day, and then they're going to have kids in college. Like, are you thinking about the full trajectory of owning, that lifespan of the customer? Like, because usually a customer lifespan is not literally like 100 years, but in your case, it kind of could be.
Yeah, so this is a good question, and I don't know that our team, our company has really thought through this, or like maybe we have and I haven't really been able to open this up yet. But, as we think about this, one of the most important things right now for us is to kind of unlock that not pre-pregnancy, but like in people who are in like 21 through 45 age range. And, each generation will get older and older, right? Obviously, but we really want to help that part get unlocked, because I think that there's a lot of fertility information once you're pregnant, once you have children. But sometimes the women who come to us will have said like, oh, I have friends who say, I wish I knew this stuff sooner. And that's kind of who we're really hoping to speak to and to be able to empower with the information we can provide.
Amazing. Well, I want to open it up to questions. So if you have a question, please use the raise hand feature. I will definitely call on you, or you can just pop the question into the chat and I will read it off for you and talk through it. So just a little on your background, because we haven't gotten to that. You have a super interesting background, and I want to understand that and sort of more about the team you're building, because people who are actually doing this kind of want to know, well, how many people does this take to actually make a reality? Is it like a team, of 20? Is it 3 people? Like, what is it? So if you could start with a little bit about your background, that'd be great.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I'm Reina. Hi. So I started out as a social worker. So I have always been interested in how people connect, how people think, and where people thrive. And community has always been a through line with everything that I've done. My previous to modern fertility career is as a coach for creative entrepreneurs. So I love working with creative types. So this conversation is so fun for me. And telling stories and sharing stories is something that I've always loved to do. And I think that, giving that sort of anecdotal stuff is what makes the data sing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I love doing here and now. What was the second part of your question?
The second was about your team. Like, just give us a sense of how many people does it take to run this? You did mention, and this actually speaks to the first question, which we'll get into, but, you started out solo. Did you always have a team? Tell us about that, because it sounds like a lot of work. And by the way, when I'm in the Slack channel on Modern Fertility, you're in there all day long responding. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is like a lot of work. So tell me about that. How do you manage it all?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So until recently, I was a one-person shop. Our team pops in quite a bit, just like with, customer experience pops in to like answer those sort of more support type questions, especially around how to test and like, is this sample good enough? And like, when do I take the test? Those are like really common questions that we get. And our CX team is great at popping in and answering them. On sort of more intangible and like more of those community engagement type things, I have one person who helps me. She's incredible and she's very part-time, and I'm the only other person who's in there like kind of messaging people. I think that will definitely probably grow once the community also grows. But I think that, my biggest, I think what's most important here is that I develop relationships with these people, and the community members that I really get, glued to, those people also feel empowered to answer the questions that are out there. So I think it's not just about like me holding the reins so tight, but really just allowing people to have the information.
That's interesting you bring up, because it was a theme that came up last week's interview with Forever 35, the podcast co-host, and they said the same thing. They're like, we started one Facebook group, it now has 18,000 people, and our fans have started 104 different Facebook groups on everything from Disney to dating to divorce. So they're in charge of that. We have nothing to do with it. So in the same way, I think it's a very important lesson to really like let your people take the reins, because you've developed that trust. A question from Amanda: how did you actually seed the Slack channel? I know it was before you arrived. Like, how did you get people to start like onboarding there? And was it something you purchase a kit, you get a card, go here? Like, how did that actually work, like tactically?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, what I understand, so I will say that I was not present for this, but what I've been told is that they started it with a few people who were like the first people who purchased the kit, who were, the most, big advocates. And, if I were to start from scratch, that's where I would start now too. You build from 10 people, ask them their opinion, and you really go from there. I think that you listen as much as possible to what questions they have, and I would jump on calls with every single one of them. I still do this. We send out community surveys, and people who respond, I jump on calls with them, whether they have not so great experiences all the way to people who are like, I talk about you all day, every day. And listening to how we can improve and how we do more of what people like is incredibly important to me. And so like, no matter how big or small the community is, I will probably continue to do that. And I think Amanda's second question was about community metrics.
Yes, the metrics. What are the community metrics that matter most to you? Like anything that's surprisingly insightful.
Yeah, so it's challenging, I will say. So in the past, when we've done community metrics, you will see, so let me talk about what I do now. We do community engagement as like the first tier measurement. I will say that Slack is not the greatest at giving us metrics, just because it's not built for community. And so we have a system for how we look at those against the number of people in our community, as well as another thing I'll note about Slack. I'm not saying that Slack is bad. I'm just saying that it wasn't built for community. So the way that they do things is different than how I might do it if I were building something. But they do it on a billing cycle versus like a monthly active type of thing. So you can see some of those numbers, but all of the way that people are categorized in like the active category is a little bit different than a typical community platform. I've done this community building thing in Facebook as well, and like the metrics are a little bit limited as well. I think they're improving it, but it can be a little bit challenging. So it really depends on what is important to your company, what is important to your bottom line, and like what does health look like in the community. And that's, to me, like to determine and have that conversation with yourself or whoever is in the room with you is really important.
So you're coming up with your own metrics essentially based on what Slack, for example, is able to provide. When you say engagement though, what do you actually, you're saying we judge engagement, like what do you actually use to do that? Did you say that the number of people that Slack tells us have been active in the last month? Like what is the actual thing you use?
Yeah, so it's the number of people, oh gosh, how do we actually measure it? There's like a system now, so I don't even remember what the equation is, but I think it's something to the effect of weekly active users for the month of versus the people who have joined, that kind of thing.
Got it.
Yep.
So you're creating kind of an equation based on the data that Slack gives you. Got it. So you're kind of backing into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. So we have another question. How did you determine that your ideal users / community members were digitally savvy and inclined to know and to use Slack? Because it's true, Slack is, especially when you guys launched, in 2017, was not really a thing as much as it is today, especially not outside of workplaces.
Yeah, so this is a really great question. So I actually don't know what the conversations that happened were. My hypothesis on this, or my guess, is that because we're from the Bay Area in San Francisco and everyone uses Slack here, it was much more, I guess it was
accepted,
much easier. Yeah. So well accepted across the area. But, I think there's so many people who are in different places now. And sometimes I will have to, jump on a call to take people on a tour through the community, and that's okay too.
Oh my God, you're the definition of high touch community manager. For anyone who's listening, I feel like somebody later asked a question about AI and bots, which we'll get to, because I think that's a really
I'm curious. Too, though.
Okay, well, we want to hear that. Let me ask Amanda's question. Do you work in partnership with brands like Maven or aspire to scale as a potential competitor? Do you know? I'm not sure that I understand.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a lot of rooms for collaboration. We do quite a bit of collaboration, but I am not privy to those conversations. I apologize. I think that there's a lot of space for, people who are doing not similar things, like talking to similar audiences.
Yeah.
So we are partnering, especially during COVID, we are partnering with a lot of fertility clinics who have closed down due to ASRM guidelines, because, people should not be going into clinics. I think that's loosening up a little bit, but doctors are suggesting their patients come and take the modern fertility test because there's no human contact. So they can get those results and the doctors get the results, and it creates a seamless process for them.
I was just going to ask you, and I can't believe we didn't even get to this, how COVID has affected your community and how you run day to day.
Yeah. So,
or has it? Is it? Positively or negatively?
Yeah. I mean, it's really challenging for people, right? Because if you were trying to conceive, or you were thinking that you were going to conceive in the next year and to start trying, that has gone out the window for a lot of people. And the doctors that they were going to go see are not taking appointments, or they're not interested in doing ultrasounds or whatever. We've had many people who have had to postpone or cancel IVF or egg freezing cycles, which can be really, really shocking and really, difficult, right?
Yeah.
So lots of different types of
impacts. Yeah. So big things impacting how everything's happening around them, but has it actually been impacting the way, people have conversations, or is it sort of the same infrastructure? It's all working. It's just different conversations and different needs.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are taking the test more because of COVID, which is really interesting to me. And then the other thing is we also added a COVID channel in the community to sort of make sure that people had that space to talk about anything COVID related.
Got it. That makes sense. So what is your view on AI and bots versus your own personal human interaction? Tell us about how you use those.
Yeah. So what I talked about earlier with scalable intimacy, it's a guiding light for me. And I think that AI is something that I use in a limited way, but so that we can create high touch experiences elsewhere. So as we onboard community members, we use, I think it's a tool called, I'm trying to remember, I think it's called GreetBot.
Can you say that again?
GreetBot.
Okay, I'm going to pop it in the chat.
Hello, yeah. Yeah. And it basically onboards people, and you can time it so that it triggers a message to them at different intervals. So maybe it's a week out, maybe it's 2 days out, whatever, so that people get those notifications. One, it's helpful because if somebody hasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? come back to the community. It's a ping that they get through Slack. So it's beneficial for us, but we're not flagging too many things that they will leave the community. And the data has shown us that people are interested in being part of it. They will open those messages and they appreciate the questions or the info that we serve up there.
Got it. So that's the only way you're using bots and of any kind, sort of is GreetBot, or are there other ways?
We also do like scheduled pushes, but it's not really all that common for us. I'm trying to think of other things that we do. Yeah, I think that's mostly it.
So do you have plans to think about integrating more of it? The reason I ask is because as the community grows, scalable intimacy becomes, I would imagine, a lot harder to execute when there's a million people in the community. So how are you thinking about that? Or is it even on the radar yet?
I don't think we're quite there yet. I think that as the community and the nature of the relationships evolve, I think it'll be different, right? I think my next move would be to have more community advisory board type folks who feel empowered to answer questions and have like a group of those people, whether they're ambassadors or whatever name you want to call them, and to give them sort of like a title or some other kind of program to make sure that they feel like they're being recognized.
I totally, that's a super smart way to think about it, and a good hack for in the meantime, before we have bots that can essentially be us, which is like tomorrow anyway. What kind of data are you able to pull to gain insights, if any, on who is in the community? So not kind of how they're engaging, but who. Amanda says, I imagine Slack might have less data than Facebook.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the perks of Slack is that we can export people's information and to be able to, you know, communicate with them in other ways. So we will do like, sorry, this is not the answer to your question, Amanda. We can send emails to those folks, etc. Right? So that's a great differentiator between Facebook, which you cannot export, and Slack, which you can export your membership. But the information that we do gather about our community members, so if you go to modernfertility.com/community, that's our like landing page, application page, and it's like a very manual process right now to get people into the community, but it really protects the safety and the personalization of the community experience. We don't want I'm trying to think of like what we can't have. It's sort of like we want to make sure that it's people with ovaries who are joining, and people aren't coming in for like commercial purposes. And if people are journalists, that they're not coming to just source information.
Or to just lurk, but that they can actually be.
That they are also people with ovaries and have, you know, fertility needs and thoughts, and that's great. So we just want to make sure that the reason why we do that is so that we keep the community protected. And then on the other side, a more streamlined process is that people who have purchased the Modern Fertility Hormone Test, they have like an automated kind of welcome gate into the community, which makes it a lot easier for people to join the community.
So you know who they are because they purchased the test. They've told you a little bit about themselves. What information do they share when they purchase that test? Is it age? I mean, other than obviously their entire blood work and all of that, which is the most intimate thing, but like, do you know their age, where they're from, occupation, or like what information do you collect from that end?
For the community side, we don't need all of that information. We just need their email address and the fact that they are a customer. For the test side though, it's a lot more, it's very safeguarded. And it's really important for us to like make sure that that's protected and safe so that people can trust us, right? Trying to answer your question. So every single test is customized and personalized to you and the birth control you may or may not be on. So we have different tests depending on where people land on that.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So the information from the Slack channel is emails and names. You don't know professions. You don't know political leanings. None of that. But from their advisory board that you're creating, that I imagine would be a lot easier to get that information because it's a smaller group, and then perhaps thinking of ways to build that psychographic profile out, because I think that could be really important. Last question, then I'm going to wrap things up. Given your expertise, this is from Amanda, are there any other brands that are building communities in an innovative way that you admire or are watching? I love this question because I really feel like you're probably on the cutting edge.
Yeah, so I have a couple. I mean, Glossier is always doing amazing things, right? So I feel
They're
like
the one, by the way, when I mentioned capital C community, lowercase c community, I've been talking to them about that, this idea of your capital C community being kind of your main hub of like your people who buy your product all the time, but that feeds your lowercase c community, which is a much, much bigger group. It's anyone who's ever interacted with a post or maybe, you know, retweeted you, that type of thing. So sorry, go on, because I agree with you. Yeah.
I also love I personally have not interacted with this, but just from seeing all the work that they've done on the Airbnb host side, I know this is a really taboo topic and a taboo time to be talking about Airbnb. I think that, you know, they have done an awesome job at this. I also personally have interacted with the Rising Tide Society. They are a channel for community channel for creative entrepreneurs and freelancers and people who are working out in, you know, doing a lot of different types of creative work, whether they're photographers or freelancers or graphic designers, etc. And they believe in community over competition, which I think is a really cool concept.
Rising Tide Society, for those who don't know, is connected to Honeybook, which is an actual just a software for, it's like a QuickBooks, and it's a super robust community, a great example of this. It's like, again, like Modern Fertility, very much connected to the core product, but it's not simply driving people to sign up for Honeybook. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's absolutely right. And I think that, you know, these all are, I think it's just such a good example of like listening to their customers and listening to people who are not customers also to inform the things that they're making in the future and like the content that they're creating too.
Very much so. So, okay, for real, last question, a tool or a doc that you use for managing that customer advisory board, or is it just a Google Doc? Like, what are you the specific tools that you're using?
What are we using? We use a lot of Google Docs. Oh man, I use Evernote a lot.
Okay.
I think that one of the things that's really important to me is to keep all the conversations straight in my brain. So whenever I have a meeting with a customer or I have a meaningful conversation that's not like a transactional conversation, I try to document that as much as possible so that when I talk to them again, they know that I know that about their history and context. So, you know, if somebody had a miscarriage and they told me about it and 3 months from now I forgot about it, that would feel really like an icky experience, right? So I try my best to document those things so that I can try to remember.
That makes sense. Well, I am going to wrap things up. Before I do, is there anything that you want to add anywhere to send people? I can pop that into the chat. Just anything that you wanted to share that we haven't talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Please come visit me inside the community at modernfertility.com/community. Like I said, it's a great way to like just meet other humans who are going through similar experiences. And like, please connect with me on Instagram. I'm also on the Instagram for Modern Fertility, but I have my own personal brand at Reina and Company, and you can just DM me over there and ask me any of these questions. Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful questions.
Oh, amazing. I'm going to just pop into the chat.
I can type.
Why don't you go ahead and put it in there because I don't want to mess it up. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. And we went right to the top of the hour, which I love. You can reach you in that community, right? There's it's like a direct line. So any other questions that you have for Reina, you can reach her there. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and your questions, as always, have been phenomenal and really helped me think more deeply on this whole subject. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining.
So much.
And this recording will be available, and I'll push it out. If you're on the email list, you'll get that if you want to share it. Thank you so much. Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye, Sarah.